Welcome young viewers. Let's try to quickly recapitulate what we learnt in the last class. We talked about healthy relationships, magnanimity of human self and acceptance. Now let's try to look into the critical part of this novel and try to analyze the character, the themes, plot and the whole structure of the novel based on different parameters. Now, the second part of the novel introduces us to different elements used by the writer and to the interesting perspectives of the writer himself. The outlook is so mature and impressive that one cannot deny his observations, which paint a true picture of life and the complexity of relationships. The way he establishes his observations enthralls the reader so much that it effortlessly aids the reader to analyze his own thought. The reader also gets an insight into the author's childhood and different factors which force him to come up with a novel like Sons and Lovers. These details provide the required platform to the author to shape his novel. The themes also show the impact of various facets of psychology on plot and character. One can also see the shift in the themes of the modern novelist. A modern novelist gives more importance to the individual than to the society. The psychological probing into the subconscious reveals that every individual has a separate personality and that one particular personality can never merge or become one with the other. Lawrence points out that those individuals must fully realize themselves as individuals before they can come into any true contact with the otherness of the individuals. This module takes up the study of an array of styles, techniques and literary elements employed by the author. The thoughts expressed in the novel get life from Lawrence's observations of the society he lived in and the experiences which played a key role in shaping his personality. Unless one is adept enough to decode the subtle signs and signals of the human psyche, it is difficult to write a novel which both challenges and offers solutions to its readers. Be it characters, rich descriptions of nature, techniques of probing, the inner depths of human mind, the author seems to have handled all these with utmost ease. Well, let's try to understand the background again of this module. What prompted Lawrence to write a novel like Sons and Lovers at a very early stage of his life? Many a time, agonizing childhood experiences leave a lasting impression on young, fragile and impressionable minds. Yes, it is true. David Herbert Lawrence was born on 11th September 1885 in the mining village of Eastwood, that is in Nottinghamshire. He was the fourth child of his parents. His father, Arthur Lawrence, was a coal miner with no intellectual pursuits. He lived a simple life, obeying his impulses and instincts, enjoying work down in the pit in the day and as wine in the pub in the evenings. Lawrence grew up in abject poverty and later succumbed to pneumonia, which in turn led to incipient tuberculosis. Always frail but intensely studious, he was encouraged by his mother, Lydia Lawrence, in his desire for knowledge. Later, he took up a job with a firm of surgical goods manufacturer, much against his aesthetic taste. Finally, he gave it up to become a pupil teacher at Eastwood. Lawrence was a prolific writer who, in the span of 19 years between his first published novel and his death, produced over 40 volumes of novels and short stories, poetry, drama and treatises and essays on the art of novelists and on a variety of miscellaneous subjects. He was a writer of great talent. He contributed a lot to literature and definitely made the world of literature worth reading, worth enjoying. It was in 1911 that Lawrence's first novel, The White Peacock, came out, and his last, Lady Chatterley's Lover, appeared in 1932. During this period, Lawrence enriched English literature with some 11 novels and a host of short stories sufficient to fill a number of volumes. Indeed, the world was lucky to have such a great author. From 1909 to 1912, Lawrence was considered to be an amateur and hesitant writer. As readers, we find his novels free from doctrinal beliefs which would dominate his later works. During this period, he wrote a number of poems and 3 novels, and the novels are The White Peacock, The Trespasser, and Sons and Lovers. Now let's go into the details of characterization and symbolism. The main features of Lawrence's characterization as reflected in Sons and Lovers are lifelikeness, study of the psyche, sexuality, sadism, love, hatred, and ambivalence of the characters. Well, young learners, it's not very easy to peep into the human mind and sketch the characters, but Lawrence was really good at this. Readers were always in awe or are always in awe at the psychic revelations. Characters would speak. The reader would immediately get connected with the theme, with the characters, and he experienced a great joy while reading his novels. But at the same time, their externals, appearances, personality traits, outlook, social considerations, economic problems also find a place in his works. Imagine the huge canvas he had in mind while writing his novels. He was a gifted writer. Thus, Lawrence comes up with a fine blend of traditional and modern elements in his characterization. The author uses a unique technique. He gives direct descriptions which enriches the imagination of the reader, and then wonderfully he places them indirectly in different situations and makes them talk. He was definitely one among those writers who made the world of literature rich, enjoyable, and memorable. The world of literature is indebted to Lawrence forever. Thus, we are told about Morrell's nice ways of doing physical work, his warm way of telling stories, and on the other hand, Mrs. Morrell tells us of his unclean feet and his brutal habits. Unless the writers have this great skill of keen observation, it is difficult for anybody to sketch the details of each character in such a subtle way. The impressionistic technique of character delineation is also employed. To be exact, there are 7 important characters, and out of these 7, 4 characters play a very prominent role in novel Sons and Lovers. They are Paul, Miriam, Clara, and Mrs. Morrell. The characters are shown in the Battle of Sexes. Nearly all the significant characters have been described from within using an emotionally oriented style. When it comes to symbolism, he beautifully talks about shimmeriness of life. What does it mean? Let me explain, or let me quote Walter Allen. He says it is described as the moment of life itself. See how beautiful the quote is, or his interpretation is. Lawrence attempts to push expressiveness beyond the possibility of language. It is the style that he intelligently chooses. Interesting poetic similes and metaphors abound, some of them new and startling. When the ordinary sources of languages fail him, he makes extensive use of suggestive symbols, rich with overtones of feeling and hidden correspondence of thought. This is possible only by those writers who understand their own self and connect with the immediate world and the society successfully. And Lawrence was one among them. Themes of Lawrence novels are equally interesting. One cannot deny the magical effect of these themes on his readers. He makes use of Freud's theory of Oedipus complex, which forms the very basis for exploring Paul's relationship with his mother. Completing the Oedipal equation, Lawrence adds a twist to the Oedipus complex. Mrs. Morrel is also actively involved in it. She desires both William and Paul in peculiarly romantic ways and does not allow them to enjoy the company of their girlfriends. How funny! Can we imagine any mother doing this to her son? At the end of the novel, Paul takes a major step in releasing himself from his Oedipus complex. He was trapped. He was sandwiched between his mother and his girlfriend Miriam. Finally, he takes an extreme step. He intentionally overdoses his dying mother with morphine, but also subverts his Oedipal fate, since he does not kill his father, unfortunately, but his mother. Another interesting theme that spices up the whole novel is the theme of bondage. What do we mean by this term? Let's see how Lawrence understands this particular term bondage and uses this as a theme very successfully in his novel Sons and Lovers. Lawrence discusses bondage or servitude in two major ways. What are they? They are social and romantic. Social obligations such as status of being a woman and industrialism stifle Gertrude Morrel. She complains of feeling buried alive. Well, many women feel this. It's not only Gertrude Morrel. This is a feeling which affects many women. A logical lament for someone married to a minor, and even the children feel they are in a tight place of anxiety. Many families, many children pass through this traumatic stage. Some they are able to come out of this complex situation, some they are able to fight, and some they get trapped and die. Romantic bondage seems to be the dominating element in the novel. What do we mean by this? What does writer means by this? Complementing the theme of bondage is the novel's treatment of jealousy. This particular negative feeling is beautifully treated by the writer in his novel Sons and Lovers. All three major characters experience the negative emotion of jealousy, which is like bondage. Lawrence was also adept in talking about contradictions and oppositions. Lawrence sketches contradictions, and they emerge so easily in human nature, especially with two great dominating emotions, love and hate. Paul vacillates between hatred and love for all the women in his life, including his mother at times. See how complex the human mind is. The most difficult thing in the world is to understand the human mind. Till today, no human could claim, yes, I have understood the human mind. Mrs. Morrel initially takes the hearty, vigorous Morrel because he is so far from removed from her dainty, refined intellectual nature. His innocence attracts Mrs. Morrel. That's how she falls in love with this miner. The decay of the body also influences the spiritual relationships. Look at the different dimensions of human mind that Lawrence dealt with. These are all complex areas of human mind. Unless the Lawrence experiences, or this indicates that Lawrence has experienced all these in his personal life. Writers' minds are very, very sensitive. Unless you are sensitive to the immediate world, it becomes very difficult for us to sketch the character in the works we take up. But Lawrence did this very successfully and beautifully. When Mrs. Morrel dies, Paul grows more sensitive, though he still refuses to look at her body. Can we imagine a novel without the traces of autobiographical element? Very rarely we come across such novels. A writer's personality is reflected in some way or the other in his works. Similar thing happened with Lawrence's Sons and Lovers. Lawrence had to endure great emotional stress in youth, and he faced many personal problems. He was a tortured soul for how many years? For full 45 years of his life. And his writings are an expression of his inner suffering, frustration, and emotional complexes. They are all in the nature of personal revelations, some more, some less. But the autobiographical note runs through them all. The most striking feature of Lawrence's characters, says E. Albert, is the resemblance they bear to their creator. They are all the projections of the novelist's own personality. Paul Morrel in Sons and Lovers, R.L. Somers in Kangaroo, and Birkin in Woman in Love are clearly projections of himself. Look at the canvas. How beautiful his strokes are, how vivid they are, how colorful they are, how deep they are. In his other characters too, there are many similarities. They share his darkness and bitterness of spirit, and like him, they live passionately and fully. Art to him was art for his sake. How beautifully he has interpreted, or how beautifully the critics have interpreted his works. Lawrence's environment as a child and as a young man played an important part in conditioning the personality of the novelist of the future. Lawrence's environment as a child and as a young man played an important part in conditioning the personality of the novelist of the future. It's very important for us to have a happy childhood, but most of us are not lucky. Lawrence was also unlucky. His childhood was turbulent, disturbing. The domestic front was torn by parental conflict, and as a result, Lawrence probably concluded that relationship between men and women was a form of conflict and not a natural expression of harmony. The early experience made him an anti-feminist. Look at the impact of impressions on young mind. It's very important to have a happy childhood. I repeat again. But how many of us are fortunate? Lawrence's style is painted with strokes of satirical flashes, particularly against women. His experiences were such. He was forced to think, or he was forced to become anti-feminist. His descriptive power is best seen in his painting of natural scenery. This practice may appear pleasing to his admirers, but is likely to prove exasperating to many sensitive readers. Lawrence's style was lively. He could get connected to his readers very easily. It was a cakewalk for him. His prose is poetic, vivid, and animated with passion. He is the master of language, of the inevitable phrase, and of spontaneous music and rhythm. But he is not free from mannerism, and also from his habit of repeating certain phrases and epithets. But this repetition is very natural to the author. The reader can also sense the streak of mysticism in all his works. and Sons and Lovers also exhibits this trait. Lawrence represents a revolt against reason. He was sensitive to the subtle and mysterious forces that are unknown to men, control the great movement of humanity. He therefore saw things differently from his contemporaries. This proves that he was a gifted writer and he displayed creative streak very frequently in his works. A vein of mysticism runs through his thought process. Disapproving the contemporary civilization, he seeks to achieve a blend between mind and matter, flesh and spirit, male and female. He has his own outlook of life to offer, his own solution to the basic problems of human existence, his own vision of man's existence with his fellows and with the universe beyond himself. How many of us can comprehend universe beyond our thinking levels? Very few of us can understand the metaphysical world. Lawrence was good at it. He excelled many times. He combined a violent hatred of the values of modern mechanized civilization with a love of the primitive and the natural and a passionate belief in the importance of the development of unique individuality. Scoring the merely intellectual faculties, he placed his trust in the experience of the senses, which for him seemed to gain in value as they become more violent. Well, this was quoted by Albert. Irritated with the intellectuality of a civilized man, he pleads with the individuals to return to the natural habit of living. By paying some heed to the mystic implications of being as being, he requests his readers not to violate this natural rule. His own appeal is to the heart rather than to the head. This shows how emotional, how sensitive he was to the matters of heart, a wonderful trait of every successful writer. He seeks to persuade his readers by sensitizing them to different hues of emotions. Bonamy Dobry has beautifully summarized his whole philosophy in the following words. Throughout his career, he had been anti-materialistic, since material for him blunts sensibility. He is for shearing away the impulses, and he rejects Christianity and Platonism with equal scorn. He is, in short, anarchic, but anarchic with a formative purpose. He would like to find a new religion. What a beautiful quote! Today, we are chased by materialistic world. We have become bundle of desires. We have become insensitive to those soft feelings which humanity demands. As a result, we have become cruel. We have become barbaric. He pleads his readers to give importance to matters of heart, to be away from the world of materialism, to take interest in the divine elements of life. That makes you human. How beautiful his outlook was towards life. Lawrence believed in the principle of polarity, a great technique he used in order to shape his works. He viewed life as a conflict of two combating forces, the masculine, active, conscious principle as being opposed to the feminine, passive, unconscious. The true relationship does not consist in obliterating the personality of the other party, but in respecting and recognizing its distinctive character. How many of us can think on these lines? Lawrence saw all evil as arising from lack of harmony and balance in relations between man and woman. A true relationship is not static but dynamic. Only then it can be considered to be worthwhile and creative. But Lawrence saw the relations between man and woman were artificial insofar as the one really never entered the life of the other. He therefore saw the adjustment of the relation between man and woman as the most urgent problem of the day. He was a visionary. He was author of the future. He could visualize the future. He could visualize the problems of humanity. In Sons and Lovers, the characters never achieve true relationships. For the desire on the part of Mrs. Morrel, Miriam and Clara to possess the personality of their partners violates the principle of polarity. They were unsuccessful in understanding each other's personality. They were not sensitive to the feelings of different people around. They became self-centered. As a result, they became unsuccessful in the roles they were in. Mrs. Morrel failed as a mother. Paul failed as a lover. He also failed as a son. He also failed as a friend to Clara. Sons and Lovers is concerned with the problems of relationships between man and women and succeeds in focusing our attention on the need of readjustment of the old relationships, not running away from them, not separating ourselves from them. Well, the interesting story of Sons and Lovers concludes on an interesting note. In its plain and straight form, the novel is the social and psychological study of the lives of miners in a village of Eastwood. It is a study of their inexplicable relations and sex life. The first part of the novel, up to the death of William, is a picture of industrial working class life. Lawrence describes two stages of English industrial development: the small scale, manageable, quasi-paternalist system, which still had some consideration for human feelings and genuine human relations, and its suppression by huge mechanistic organizations that inevitably negate the life of men who are engaged in them. Nevertheless, the novelist has proved through the story of Paul and Clara, Miriam, Mrs. and Mr. Morrel that it is easier to lead a smooth life of mutual adjustment in an agrarian society than in an industrialized society. The novel also is a book about modern civilization. It is deeply concerned with the forms and perversions of love of the modern society. The novelist is deeply concerned with the maladjustments of life, the suppressions and deformities of modern life. He finds two polarities running throughout human life: light and darkness, male and female, love and hate. And he prescribed the reconciliation for the vital fulfillment of men and women. Lawrence felt that all evils arise from the lack of such reconciliation and adjustment. Such maladjustments are the root cause of the tragedy of modern life. Lawrence once wrote, "I can only write what I strongly feel about, and that at present is the relation between men and women. After all, it is the problem of today, the establishment of new relations or the adjustments of old ones between men and women." Thus, Lawrence sees human relations essentially in terms of conflicts, and he explores ways and means to understand them. Thus, Lawrence sees human relations essentially in terms of conflict, and he explores ways and means of adjusting old relations and establishing new ones. I am sure you must have enjoyed the captivating summary of this wonderful novel. Thus, Lawrence sees human relations essentially in terms of conflict, and he explores ways and means of understanding relationships and old relations and establishing the new ones. Well, young learners, we have come to the end of the second module. I hope you enjoyed the summary of this great novel, and I am sure you must have learnt and got many signals to better your life from this novel. Thank you, one and all.